Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, we are diving straight into the massive cultural phenomenon that is GLP-1 weight loss and diabetes drugs. We're going to break down exactly what they are, the science of how they actually work, and honestly, most importantly, how they're fundamentally changing not just our bodies, but our brains too.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll meet the GLP-1 family, see how these drugs work, look at how they rewire brain reward systems, discuss the side effects and what happens when you stop, and finally explore the future of these meds beyond just weight loss.
All right, part one. Let's meet the GLP-1 family. You know, we hear this dizzying array of brand names in the news every single day, but they largely group under just a few key active generic ingredients. Take semaglutide, for example. That's the active ingredient in Ozempic for type 2 diabetes, but it's also the exact same thing in Wegovy for chronic weight management. And it's the exact same story for tirzepatide. You probably know it as Mounjaro for diabetes or Zepbound for obesity. So the big takeaway here is that it's essentially the exact same core pharmaceutical technology. It's just tailored, dosed, and FDA approved for different specific uses. Now, all of these drugs fall under a class of medications called incretin mimetics. And hey, don't let that clinical term intimidate you. It simply means they're designed to structurally imitate natural incretin hormones, like GLP-1 that your own small intestine naturally produces right after you eat a meal. Moving on to part two, how GLP-1 drugs actually work. Now this perfectly illustrates what we call the gut-brain-pancreas triangle. When you eat, the GLP-1 hormone binds to receptors that trigger this incredible multi-step process. Basically, it signals your pancreas to release insulin, it inhibits the release of glucagon, and, this is key, it delays gastric emptying in the stomach, which basically means it keeps your food in there a lot longer. So the result of this whole complex biological cascade, you get dramatically lowered blood sugar and a very pronounced feeling of physical fullness. Because your stomach is emptying slower and your brain is getting these massive signals that you're full, your overall calorie intake drops significantly. And you know, this was the original mechanism scientists understood when they developed these drugs for diabetes in the first place, essentially tricking the body into feeling physically stuffed. Which brings us to part three, rewiring brain reward systems. Okay, here is where it gets absolutely fascinating. New research out of the University of Virginia shows that these drugs are doing so much more than just making your stomach feel full. We have to answer a really fundamental question here. Why do you suddenly stop craving the cake? It's not just that patients feel too full to eat it. The actual craving itself just vanishes. Poof! Well, incredibly, researchers found that the newer GLP-1s are reaching deep into the brain. They are literally altering a specific neural pathway that links the hindbrain to the central amygdala, which communicates directly with your dopamine-producing neurons. By acting on this specific circuit, these drugs are effectively turning down the volume on your desire to pursue high-calorie foods. The absolutely crucial distinction here is that these drugs are altering the brain's value assignment system. Your brain literally stops viewing that piece of chocolate cake as a high-value prize to be won. You aren't just tricking your stomach into feeling stuffed anymore. You are quite literally temporarily rewriting your brain's motivation and reward software. It's a total game changer.
But that takes us to part four, side effects and stopping.
Because these drugs dampen your dopamine responses to reduce those cravings, some patients are actually reporting a psychological side effect known as anhedonia. If you haven't heard of it, anhedonia is a diminished sense of enjoyment in everyday life. Basically, things that used to bring you joy just start to feel a bit flat. Imagine your absolute favorite hobby suddenly feeling like a chore. That really highlights just how incredibly powerful these compounds are when it comes to altering our neurochemistry. Now, beyond the neurological impacts, the physical reality of these drugs includes some pretty common gastrointestinal distress, especially early on in the treatment. And furthermore, we really have to talk about the massive rebound effect. Studies are showing that if a patient stops taking the medication, they often regain 50 to 70% of the weight they lost within just 1 year. Plus, metabolic markers, like blood sugar, worsen right back up. So the implication here is that for a lot of people, this could genuinely be a lifelong treatment. And that brings us to a massive logistical hurdle. Because of the high cost and the extreme shortages of these name-brand drugs, a staggering 1.5 million users in the US alone have turned to compounding pharmacies to get alternative, custom-made versions. Now, while this does provide much-needed access, pharmacy regulators are warning that many online compounding pharmacies are operating illegally, which carries some pretty significant regulatory and safety risks for the consumer. Okay, part five, the future beyond weight loss.
Right now, it's pretty much all about weekly auto-injections. But pharmaceutical companies are aggressively developing small molecule oral pills to replace them. Now, while oral pills do require some really strict daily fasting rules to absorb properly, they're so much cheaper and easier to manufacture at scale. This shift to pills, it could drastically lower costs and expand global access to millions of people who are currently just priced completely out of the market. And because of their profound effect on dopamine, the scope of what these drugs can actually treat is exploding in some totally surprising ways. Right now, they're being studied to treat substance use disorders like alcohol and nicotine addiction. They're also being actively tested to mitigate the weight gain that's often caused by psychiatric medications, and they've actually already gained approvals for treating severe liver diseases like MASH and even reducing moderate to severe obstructive sleep apnea. So as you can probably guess, the pipeline is absolutely packed. Over the next 2 years, we are expecting a massive wave of major FDA decisions. We're talking accessible oral formats and new multi-receptor drugs like retatrutide. Retatrutide targets not just one, but up to 3 different hormone receptors for potentially even more dramatic results. To summarize where we are right now, we really have to look at the immense power of altering human motivation. As UVA neuroscientist Dr. Ali Guler notes, the implications of directly editing our reward pathways go way, way beyond just dropping a few pounds. We are venturing straight into the territory of modifying impulse control and human pleasure itself. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with that exact thought. We have to ask ourselves, how is society going to adapt when millions upon millions of people are taking medications that fundamentally change how they desire, how they crave, and how they experience pleasure? I mean, it is a medical breakthrough for sure, but it's also a profound societal shift. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking those big questions.